Welcome to the Spiritual Nerds Podcast. We are three friends who are passionate about spirituality, metaphysics, and the journey of awakening. Every week we'll be having heart-led and spirit-filled conversations on topics that interest us. And it is our deepest intention that this podcast serve to open an authentic, vulnerable, and fun space where we can be ourselves, share our stories, and in doing so, it may inspire and support you on your own awakening journey. So, hope you enjoy the episode.
So we are talking about intuition today. And intuition is a big topic and something that we all probably have been working with for a while. It can be also known as inner guidance or our soul's voice or our spirit talking with us. There are so many ways to understand or think about intuition. For me, one of my intentions in my life is to live from my intuition, to listen deeply to my intuition. So it's almost a topic that it is embodied in a way. Might be harder for me to talk about it conceptually, but I want to hear what you guys think. How do you think about intuition?
Yeah, I do think of it in a similar way of it's your soul's voice. It is that inner knowing, and it is an embodied knowledge. It is coming from our senses. And something that takes cultivating and really tuning into in order to allow it to guide us. But it's like our internal compass. It's our internal GPS that has the ability, if we tune into it, to really support us in moving in the direction that is of our highest good.
I love that. I love the internal compass. That's definitely the way I think about it. And I absolutely think that intuition is kind of, I guess I think about it as your most basic feeling of spiritual guidance. I mean, I think it's also the most ubiquitous within the culture. So it's kind of a fun topic to talk about because we have these touchstones in the culture like a gut feeling or a mother's intuition. And these are all ways that at a very basic level, we have access to guidance that we may not even be. This is maybe the uncultivated aspect of intuition, where it's just like all of a sudden you get a feeling like walk into a room and you get a little clinch and you're like, something is not right here. And then maybe you move away or you don't. And then you learn a lesson about what it's like to not listen to your intuition. So I really like it as a topic because I feel like it's very relatable for people. I think most people have had an experience where they have felt it in the body. And I do think that when we're talking about intuition as opposed to a clairsentience or clairaudience or claircognizance, it's an embodied feeling. And I like to think about it as an expansive feeling, an open feeling, and that when intuition is pinging you to be aware of something or that maybe something isn't right for you, it's like a contracting or closing feeling. And I'm sure we're going to get into this a little bit more, but one of the big struggles with intuition is how do we separate the egoic mind's chatter, the kind of indoctrinated things that we have, versus listening to what your internal compass is telling you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought in the clairs, but we might need to explain what the clairs are, because I was actually thinking that, the clairs actually are ways we receive intuition. And so they're really important. And I think when I was learning to trust my intuition, when I was setting that intention for myself, it was so helpful to know how I received that information. So for me, my main way that I receive intuition is through claircognizance, which is just a knowing. So there's a moment that you don't know something and then you know it. That often comes through intuition comes through that channel, but also clairsentience in the body. It's just a felt sense. But I'm also a very visual person. So I do sometimes I'll get like a literal green light. Like I will see a green light in my mind. I'm like, oh, green light. That's just a little nudge. But the other thing that so claircognizance is when you receive just through knowing. Clairaudience is when you hear guidance, literally hear guidance. I have a friend who hears songs. So it'll be like, stop in the name of love. And so she'll be like, nope. So she'll get information that way. Clairsentience is feelings in the body. Clairvoyance is, seeing images. Is there more?
I think you hit them.
Yeah, those are the ones.
The main ones.
But I also think what you said was interesting about, I think a big question that people have is how do I trust my intuition? How do I know it's intuition? And I think that's like when Shayna was saying it's a practice. I do think it's a practice. I think that's one of the things that I love about meditation and silence is that's when a lot of intuition comes in because you're quieting the mind enough, or you're quieting yourself down enough to hear and tune into that different channel. And it can be subtle, it can be loud, but often it can be subtle, and it takes stillness and silence to tune in. At least I think when you're practicing the difference, because it does feel different. And for me, when intuition comes in, I feel very calm. It gives me a feeling of peace. If it's not intuition, it's probably coming with a fair amount of anxiety or effort, feeling like there's going to be effort. And so that's sort of how I tell the difference in myself.
Yeah. I appreciate you talking about the clairs because I think it's true. I think we think of it often as a gut feeling and an embodied feeling. And I think it is that. It is that for me. I think it can commonly be that. But I do think we can get our intuition can come through any of those channels, but we often have one that is stronger than the others. Mine is more clairaudience, but I do also have sometimes it's just a knowing. But I have to be honest that I still struggle a lot with differentiating intuition from the mind and fear. And I don't know if we want to jump into this too fast, but I think it does require quieting the mind and getting quiet in general, slowing down so that we can hear. I think it does tend to be much quieter, at least initially, as we're building that muscle. It can be a lot more subtle. I've heard it tends to be neutral or calm. It doesn't have that tinge of worry or anxiety or franticness or whatnot to it. And yet, I've also hear that intuition it's usually not the rational thing, right? It's when we know it's our mind, if it's overly rationalized and logical. And so then I think, well, if it's not always that, then it doesn't come, we don't receive it in a fearful way, but it can induce anxiety because it often might lead us out of our comfort zone. So I'll stop for there for a moment, but I have a lot to say about it. Those are my initial thoughts right now.
Yeah, I love that tension that you're describing between the idea of doing something that is potentially outside your normal zone, your normal comfort zone, and that being something that brings up anxiety versus having a kind of knee-jerk reaction to something which can be kind of the egoic mind, which also produces anxiety. And they're very hard to differentiate those two things. And I think, again, we're going to go back to the referencing practice. And I think this is where any kind of mindfulness practice or stillness practice really comes in handy, because you have a part of you that you've trained to take a beat. And the beat, the moment that you kind of take a breath and assess, is where you're going to allow in that guidance to come in. And it's not necessarily going to be the ego mind kind of jumping in really quickly. I mean, a lot of times I feel like intuition is, for me, it's like letting that part of my brain kind of play out, calm down, and then taking a breath and then listening, be like, is this actually the way I want to proceed in this situation? And so it does require a bit of discipline in that sense, and faith, doing things that maybe feel a little challenging to your fight or flight system, which is loud and big and there to help you out in kind of these big situations. But most people are not in true danger most of the time. And when you are, your body is pretty much kicking in and taking over anyways. So there's always that tension that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess for me, it almost feels like, when I think about when I was practicing listening to my intuition and discerning what was intuition, what I realized over time was that the mind and the sort of anxious body, the conditioned body, is going at a rate and a speed that intuition is going at like a completely different speed. So it was almost like jumping off of one train to another train, and the intuition train is just a lot quieter. It's a lot slower. It's a lot kinder. It's more peaceful, and may take you in directions that the mind hadn't, or the ego wasn't thinking of or hadn't planned on. So it's a lot of letting go of control. So for me, that tension of like the leap from one train to the other happened over a long period of time, because it's just a kind of, you almost have to get used to the different tempo, the different pacing. And so slowing down really is, so key, I think, for this. And then another thing I was thinking about that is, I think part of making that leap is just practicing trusting it. So there's a way that intuition is always coming in, and then we as humans can act on it, right? And the more we're acting on it and trusting it, the more we're getting in that flow, inviting more intuition to come in. So there's this kind of wobbly practice at the beginning. It's like, should I trust that? Should I do that? That's crazy, or whatever. And then you do it, and then you're like, oh, I didn't think it was going to turn out that way, or that really was. So we can use hindsight as a way to build our faith in our intuition. But we have to act, because I think intuition comes like, it'll come and then it'll wait sometimes for you to act,
Yeah.
And it can wait 10 years. It's a lot of patience.
I really like that metaphor. And I think you're right. And what stood out to me was that control piece. For me personally, to act on the intuition often is so scary, and it does take a lot of trust to not do what my mind is telling me to do, the thing that makes the most sense. I'm very logical and rational, and when it's telling me to do something that doesn't fit with my logical mind, it is really, really hard to follow. And so I think what can be really helpful is to practice with the simplest things, the things that don't require a big leap of faith, that aren't going to impact your life in any really significant way. And just like you said, with that hindsight, when you're like, oh, okay, I did that and it felt good, or it worked out, or I understood this better, or it helped me see something in a different way and go in this direction instead of that direction. When we can do it with the littler things and it works out, I think that's a really good way to build that muscle to then trust it with bigger and bigger knowings.
Yeah, and two things that makes me think of. One is that feedback loop that you were talking about, Ashley, where you trust your intuition and then you reflect, and having some kind of practice around that can be very helpful, especially when you're intentionally trying to build trust in your intuition. So that could be a morning journaling practice. It could be a gratitude practice at night, but just some way that you are reflecting on maybe an intentional choice that felt intuitive, and having a moment where you just say, well, that worked out okay. That went well. It actually unfolded in this beautiful way that I never could have imagined. And that leads me into my second thing, which is the control is a big piece. And Shana, you were talking about that kind of fear that comes up. And I think one of the things that makes me think of is releasing expectation. And that when you are following your intuition, it is very helpful to just release all expectation of how something is going to unfold. To just, because the ego mind likes to project. That's how it keeps you safe. That's how it likes to operate. It's also what keeps you stuck in life patterns, because you have a trap that you've been wearing most of your life, and you just keep kind of making, oftentimes unconsciously or subconsciously, you're kind of making decisions that are fitting in with the way you think about yourself. And a lot of that is because you're trying to project out and figure out, what can I expect in the future? And there's this beautiful surrendering that happens when you tap into your intuition and you just say, I don't know what's going to unfold. And I'm actually okay with that, because there's a lot of things that are happening in our lives that we can make intuitive decisions on that, as you said, Shana, aren't super high stakes. It's like, you can do this a different way. You can do it a slower, more intentional, heart-filled way, and then just see where it goes, and not necessarily be calculating, if I do this, then I will get this reaction, which is often how we're conditioned to live.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something about, you can make this decision consciously, or your life can kind of make it for you or force you into it. But at some point, you do have to decide, which path am I going to take? Am I taking the path of intuition, listening to my intuition? Am I following this mysterious inner knowing? Where does it come from? I have one client who was on a very successful path in business and was hitting all the highest marks and getting all the best, jobs, schools, whatever. And her intuition was telling her she wanted to cook and to be a chef, so eventually she listened to that and made that leap of faith. So there's just things in life where we think we're on one track, and our life wants something different for us. Our soul had a different plan. We can't always really even know what any of it is all about. So there's this kind of conscious, or sometimes we get pulled into it, choice we can make where we're okay with, or we're giving ourselves permission to let go more and more and more of what we thought our life was about, and really listen deeply to the unfolding, because it's unfolding in each moment. Intuition comes through in that kind of mysterious unfolding. And so then it becomes this windy path that has no plan. We're not in control. We're only in control of following it, of listening and doing the next right thing.
Mhm.
And that's the practice, is we get quiet, we listen, and we do the next right thing. It's just completely different from what I was taught about how to live life, how to be human, how to do Ashley, you know. I think it's more exciting, more rewarding, deeply fulfilling. I feel connected to myself. I feel connected to a greater mystery, a greater intelligence. I feel held in it. I feel supported in it. So I was highly motivated to practice and make that leap. And I'm still, working to release ideas. I mean, there's just infinite conditioning about ideas. Oh, that too, releasing that too. But yeah, there's this underlying thing of like, what do you believe? I guess it comes down to your values and your belief system. What do you guys think about that?
I think that's all sounds beautiful and true. When we're guided by our intuition, and that to me, it's like sort of the flow of life, there is not a right way, right? It's not leading us in one direction. Like you were saying, like there's this outcome that it's pulling us towards or moving us towards. It's like it's a flowing, and it doesn't have a end point or a destination. It's just like what feels true, what feels right, what feels good, what's lighting me up, what feels like the choice point here that feels more expansive than contractive, right? But if it's okay, I almost want to bring it back to a little bit simpler of what are ways in which we can notice it in just the day to day. I think of like, what do I want to eat for breakfast? I don't know. Is that too basic? But it seems like that's a way of connecting to it that was really helpful to me, as these simple things of, does the cereal sound good, or does a green drink sound better? Or, and just notice how your body feels with each one of those. And I believe that is your intuitions. Like, okay, this feels like it's this best choice for me. Or do I want to read a book, or do I want to go out and garden? These are like simple ways to sort of tune into that, knowing that are, again, not those high stake things, but then which one feels more exciting in your body, I guess might be a way I would describe that. Which one feels like the yes in your body? And then it builds bigger and bigger to bigger decisions and choices. And from there.
Yeah, I'm reminded of an expression, which is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And it's a very simple kind of thing to think about, but it's actually very deep. And it's, how do you want to be in every moment? Do you want to be tapping in and letting joy and kind of love guide the way? And I think, to your point, Shayna, with something even as simple as, yeah, what am I going to eat? Or what activity am I going to do? Again, there's no right or wrong decisions, but I don't think you're ever going to go down the wrong path if you're moving towards something that is lighting you up. And that also is just something that I want to do in terms of living my life. I want to live each moment fully, because I'm not necessarily as concerned about this bigger, longer term outcome. I'm more trying to be present in each moment, and to kind of, for lack of a better term, suck the life out of each moment, be really in it. And I think that can lead you to making decisions that are just, they're going to be more heart centered. And that is, I think, always going to be in alignment with your intuition. And I will just, again, this is a little more broad, so I will bring it back down to the practical and say for me in the body, I do like to go with what feels contractive and what feels expansive. So, and that could be as simple as being drawn, if your eye is drawn to the green smoothie and you're feeling like that's what you want to have, then that's just the way you go. Even if you're like, oh, but I got to get the blender and I got to get the berries, whatever. and the same thing with the gardening or watching TV. I mean, it's not a value judgment thing. So sometimes it's the TV.
Totally.
Even though I'm a spiritual person, sometimes it's like, sit down and take a beat. And you have to give yourself a little moment to tap in and say, what do I actually need right now?
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah.
That I'd love to get your guys' perspective on. So when we talk about the expanding or contracting, I think what comes to me and what I have heard from people that I have been in circles with and held circle for, that the differentiating intuition from fear. And sometimes they'll be like, oh, it's my gut feeling, like I'm not going to do that. You like get that contracted. But really it's fear because it's outside of your comfort zone, or it's like your conditioning that doesn't want you to move in a different direction. And so I'm just curious of your guys' take on, how do we know if it's the fear, which feels contracted, versus maybe our intuition is just leading us in a direction that's very unfamiliar and so scary?
Well, I will say that I think this is actually where the mind does come into play, and this is where you can take yourself upstairs in the brain for a minute and actually let it run free a little bit, and let it take scenarios down to their logical conclusion. So this is something like the Stoics talked about. Run down the worst case scenario of making that decision and reality test it and be like, so how bad would this be if this turned out really bad? By staying kind of intellectual and analytical, you can use that as a tool to just take it down and be like, even the worst case scenario, if I did this class versus this class, isn't a big thing. And then what that does is it can give you a little bit of relief and say, okay, we're not talking about something that's like catastrophic here. So now that I've done that kind of mind game, I can set that aside, and then I can come back in and kind of sit in the body, and hopefully that practice can give you a little more clarity. That's how I would do it.
I feel like I want to give a cheeky answer. I'm not sure if this is a great answer, but like part of me wants to say, like, you know the difference. Like, I there, of course, like when intuition comes in and it's not in line with how the ego has decided life is going to go, there's anxiety, there's tension there. But if you really pay attention, if you're really there, you know. So that's my experience. My experience is, I know. I could get intuition. I have gotten intuition about something and not acted on it for 10 years. Mm-hmm. But it just keeps coming back, and it just keeps coming back, and it just keeps coming back. And 10 years later, I'm ready. My ego's ready. My condition, I've done whatever healing, and my life circumstances are set up so that now it's time for me to act on it or something. But I might in my mind want to play around with, is that ego? Is that intuition? Is that ego? Is that intuition? Is that ego? But if I'm really honest with myself, I know. I know it's true. And that's why I was saying, I think it takes practice acting on it. And then in hindsight being like, oh, that scary thing I thought was going to happen didn't happen. That opened up all these other doors for me that I had no idea were going to open up, or would I? Maybe you just get the satisfying feeling that choosing the green drink really felt good. Or when Nate did the muscle testing, in that other episode, like, that trip was fruitful or adventurous or felt really good. And so you get this, like, this reward sort of feeling. Mm-hmm. But The thing about intuition, and I really worked with this a lot as a therapist, is connecting people to their intuition. Because what I noticed is that the more people were connected to their intuition, the less anxiety they had, the less depression they experienced. There was something about making that connection that just made life better. So but it is a process. It's a process of leap of faith. Even if it's a small leap of faith, it's still a leap of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time to choose intuition, because we were all, I mean, maybe not everybody was sort of conditioned to ignore their intuition. I know that I wasn't conditioned to pay attention to my intuition. So for me, it was like, really, I had to learn about it. I took a course on it. I learned about it and I practiced it, and the benefits are incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my cheeky response, Shayna.
I appreciate both of those responses. And yeah, I think I love the practice of the worst case scenario, because it really usually does be like, oh, I'll survive and be okay. And I'll just pivot and everything. It'll be fine. And yeah, as you said that, Ashley, I was like, oh yeah, that's true. I think when it's intuition that's like saying no, and just like that gut feeling that it's not right, I don't think it probably has all the stories to it, right? It's just like it's just a no. And it's not no because it'll be terrible or this thing will happen, or it's like you just know it's a no. So yes, yeah, seems very true to me. And it made me also, when you were talking, think of just the reality of this is something that we have to practice and cultivate. I have also done a program on this, because when we're young, we are intentionally or unintentionally taught not to trust ourselves. I think of a scenario where a parent is upset, but they don't want to worry their kid, and their kid's like, what's wrong? Oh, nothing's wrong. I'm fine. And then the kid's like, wait a minute, but it seems like something wrong. So maybe I'm wrong. And there's so many moments of that makes us doubt ourselves. So I do think it's really intentional to reconnect to that and learn to trust that voice. And it does take practice.
The other thing that I was thinking about being a therapist, but really just in life, is I can really hear the difference between intuition and my egoic mind in my own system. I've really learned to discern the difference, but I can also hear it in other people. Mm. So I could have a client talk for 30 minutes in one tone of voice and then drop one sentence in a different tone of voice. And I'm like, ooh, that's your intuition, right? And I can also hear it in my husband. So if he says, this is a dumb example, but if he says, let's go to Hawaii, he could say, let's go to Hawaii. Do you want to go to Hawaii? Of course, I always want to go to Hawaii. That's why it's a dumb example. But like he can say it, and I can hear we're going or we're not going. I don't even have to answer it. I don't have to get involved. If he says, let's go to Hawaii in one tone of voice, I know we're going. I don't have to worry about it. If he says it in another voice, I'm like, we're probably not going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know what that is. He's a very intuitive person. So I have learned to hear the difference in his voice when it's intuition or anxiety or conditioning. So it's just interesting, that was my cheeky response. You know it in yourself, but you also can hear it in other people. If you're paying attention, the difference.
Yeah. And I think I'm just going to insert a little bit here and say that this is a process, and it's a journey, and there are many different levels at which you can dip your toe into this water, and you have to honor where you are at and what your comfort zone is with this stuff. And so it's just like what Ashley was saying, you're going to constantly be given an opportunity to revisit something. And the practices of being reflective, of being mindful, and of doing little tests here and there, they all kind of work together to kind of create a part of you that you're cultivating, and it doesn't take over. It doesn't like start operating overnight. It just little bits, and you start to trust, and you start to feel a little more confident leaning in that way. But there's always going to be moments where you knee jerk something, or you feel like, even though I'm thinking this is probably my mind telling me to do it this way, I can't override it, and I'm going to do it. And then that's just the beautifulness of life, and also, so I guess I'm saying all of this to just release a little bit of the tension that sometimes we can have. And I feel like sometimes this happens in spiritual community, and when we are working on self-improvement, where there's a way that even the ego mind kind of creeps in and wants you to do intuition better. And it's like, take a hike, buddy. Just honor yourself and move at your own pace. And I think just the intention to live more intentionally and to be a little more tapped into your intuition, that is like, I would say that's almost 90% of it, is just putting that out there and then following the breadcrumbs, and again, releasing expectation.
I so appreciate that you said that. It's so important. And there's many times now where like you said, Ashley, it took you 10 years for one thing. Sometimes I'm like, I hear it and I'm not ready. And then I have to trust that whatever that was meant to be, it's going to find me in a different way. And so, yeah, I think taking the pressure off, that we don't always, if we're not ready to listen, that's okay. There will always be another opportunity.
In fact, I would say if you're practicing, the pressure probably delays things from being able to unfold. So intuition could come in, you could be like, that's nice, not ready, let it be. My favorite example is my first meditation retreat 10 or 11 years ago, or however long ago was, I got a really strong intuition to do meditation groups. And I had never done that before. And it was my first retreat. And I was like, I don't think so, But then that year, the next year, I went to make a website and I couldn't find my name or any combination of my name that I liked. And I got this intuition to do mountainmeditationgroup.com. Why? What? I wasn't doing meditation. I wasn't doing anything like that. So here, fast forward, it took me 10 years. Mm-hmm. So, and now I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing meditation retreats on a mountain with groups. It's like crazy, So it's okay. The timing was perfect. There was no rush. But I got a little hit. This is what's coming, And we can be so gentle with it. It's so much nicer to be gentle with it and gentle with ourselves and excited and curious and because it's always supportive. It's never going to ask us to do anything that's bad for us, really, truly, ever.
And playful with it. We can be playful with it. We don't have to take it all so seriously.
Really?
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. So as we wrap up, I wonder, is there any last thoughts on this? Or it feels like we may have just shared those last thoughts, but any practices that you have that helped you even maybe at the beginning to really tap into it?
Yeah, my last thought, and I'll give a practice. My last thought is to just what Ashley was talking about there is, when you're thinking about the why, about why to do this, which is important to think about because it's going to help you stay motivated. The why is just that it will enrich your life. And when you decide to live a life that is led by intuition and led by spirit, it just, for me anyways, it makes life a lot more magical and a lot more fun and a lot more entertaining. And I don't think that my kind of linear analytical mind is going to get me through this life in a way that's going to be as fulfilling, as exciting, as dynamic as I think that my heart and my spirit is. So that's my why, and that helps keep me motivated. And then just as a simple practice, I've said it before, I'm going to say muscle testing. For me, I started muscle testing food. That was one of my easiest ways. And that is a very good intro. And I'll include a link to how to muscle test just with your fingers, because that's kind of the easiest. It's not very obtrusive and it's pretty easy to do. And we'll put a link in the show notes. And that for me has been a really good way to just like know that I'm touching in with my body and to create a little bit of buffer or distance between that kind of fear-based mind coming in and creating doubt. I can do this little practice, which bolsters me.
Awesome. Yeah. I agree that I think if we are not tapped into our intuition or spirit and we're leading our lives just from our mind and our ego, it's so limited. It's just so limited. And living from a more intuitive, soul-led, heart-led, spirit-led place just opens up possibilities, and can be really frightening. And it's also a lot more enriching and fun and an exciting way to live. And I would say that my practice is learning to understand, connecting to your body and knowing what your body's yes feels like and what your body's no feels like. And yeah, I'll just stop there. That if we check in, we can know what yes feels like, which is usually more expansive. No usually feels more contracted. You might feel it in a certain part of your body. Maybe your belly gets really tight on a no, and your arms might feel light and tingly on a yes. It can feel different in anybody's body, but noticing what that is for you is an easy way to tap into that.
Yeah, one of my friends says, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of makes you go, oh yeah, I know what a hell yes feels like,
Mm-hmm.
But the last thing I would say is, a life, most of us are conditioned to seek worthiness in our life, that our life is about, consciously or unconsciously, about seeking worthiness. And I would say intuition does not care about worthiness. Intuition knows you're worthy. So intuition isn't going to lead you down paths that soothe the ego, that prove your worthiness. In fact, it may lead you into what feels like the opposite because it already knows how worthy you are. So that would be another thing, I think, when we're talking about the why, is to really understand your own conditioning around seeking worthiness and how willing are you to release that? Because intuition already knows that you're totally 100% okay, exactly the way you are. And it just wants you to be more you.
Love it. All right. And that wraps up our intuition conversation. All right, spiritual nerds, thank you for listening to today's episode. We had so much fun. And if this episode resonated with you, hit the subscribe button and consider leaving us a review. We would appreciate that so much. And consider sharing this with the people in your life who you think might enjoy these conversations. Also, if you have a question, let us know. Email us at spiritualnerdspodcast@gmail.com, and we may just answer those questions on the show. Much gratitude and many blessings, and have a wonderful day.